Have a new reading. Lights must...
In the 22nd century, humanity was just starting to crawl out of its own wars on an irradiated Earth and form an interstellar organization spanning across the galaxy, and even beyond. They would see what they considered progress in the 23rd, 24th, and 25th centuries. Little did they know they were living in what would later be known as the Dark Age of Technology. Let's just get into it.
Just wondering how they'll piece together our lives a few hundred years from now.
Depends on how big the pieces are.
A pad here, captain's log there, maybe a couple of holodeck programs. It won't be as much to go on as we might think. I've gone through dozens of histories written about 21st century Earth. All of them biased in one way or another.
Now, before we dive too deep, here's something to keep in mind. Both the Federation and the Imperium of Man's Logos Historica Verita admit that their histories might be corrupted. They acknowledge that what's recorded could be a mix of truths, myths, or outright inaccuracies. So if anything seems inconsistent, it could just be historians not getting it quite right. Take the timelines, for example. In Star Trek, the main events are recorded in the 22nd to 24th centuries, and the 31st century, but that's New Trek, while Warhammer lore unfolds in millennia. But there's a surprising overlap. The Dark Age of Technology in Warhammer 40k spans the 15th to the 25th millennium. Could a few extra zeros have been misplaced, or added, over time? If so, the pieces start to fit, especially when we look at the origins of the Emperor of Man.
I've always held a sneaking admiration for this one.
He was the best of the tyrants, and the most dangerous.
They were Superman in a sense. Stronger, braver, certainly more ambitious, more daring.
Gentlemen, this romanticism about a ruthless dictator is...
It's Spock. We humans have a streak of barbarism in us. Appalling, but there, nevertheless.
There were no massacres under his rule.
and as little freedom.
No wars until he was attacked.
Consider this. On Earth, a charismatic leader rose to power, someone who would command unwavering loyalty, a tyrant. He would be benevolent, though. In fact, he would be admired by those who disagree with him. Ultimately, though, even with his guidance, a war would break out, eventually escalating to nuclear warfare that left the planet irradiated. This leader, maybe remembered in Star Trek's history as Khan, had genetically modified followers, perhaps like a family, maybe even sons, some of whom sought to help him dominate the universe. Khan, as recorded, ruled Earth graciously for a time, as I've noted, treating humanity well but unable to control its darker impulses. Eventually, the planet became unlivable and he either disappeared or went into stasis. Federation records say he was killed, but can we really trust that? Maybe he was killed, with his genetic lineage used to create super soldiers. Or maybe he survived and was entombed in stasis as humanity's last hope. A beacon, a light for them to follow.
Being unable to withstand us, if you defend yourselves, you will be punished.
Moving forward in time, we encounter cybernetics and the war that involved the Men of Iron. It's interesting that the Men of Iron also corresponded with the use of servitors, two elements that also appear in ancient Federation and Imperium texts. Speaking of the Men of Iron, we also have the Borg. Imagine a cybernetic empire that launches a relentless war against the Federation. Some even speculate that the Borg were human creations. This war with them lasted years, if not decades, and cost countless lives. Now, what if this hive mind was eventually subdued and repurposed, with their children turned into cherubs and the adults enslaved as menial laborers? As the Imperium evolved, the race might have been replaced by clones, but the template was still there, a chilling way to keep the threat of the Men of Iron in check. As stated, this aligns with the servitors we see in Warhammer. Could it be that the Men of Iron were retooled, forced into subservience?
Captain, this is incredible. We've entered what appears to be the Borg nursery.
Their children reduced to flying slaves and their adults repurposed. Official texts from the Imperium of Man claim these come from criminals or clones, but that could be a cover-up because, well, xenotechnology is a heresy after all. It honestly makes sense when you think about it. These are two similar stories, one just told in a positive light. Even the Tyranids have a precedent in Federation history.
What is that?
In Star Trek The Next Generation, a bug-like species once tried to overthrow Starfleet, using Starfleet personnel against itself. These early gene stealers couldn't fully mimic humans, but they might have been testing the waters, signaling the greater hive mind that more food was available. This could be humanity's first encounter with said gene stealers, a prelude to the terrifying assault that would follow.
I have attempted to trace the message Remick was sending. I believe it was aimed at an unexplored sector of our galaxy.
Any idea what the message was, Data?
I believe it was a beacon.
A beacon?
Yes, sir. A homing beacon.
The development of space travel shows some parallels as well. Starfleet early warp tech was primitive by Warhammer standards, but it might have led to experiments with more dangerous, faster methods of travel through the warp. Who's to say that Starfleet wasn't on the verge of discovering this technology during the Dark Age? And that any other form of travel that was known would simply be hidden or forgotten. In terms of warfare, Federation historians recorded conflicts like the Dominion War, bloody battles, and the loss of entire fleets. Warhammer historians, similarly, write of Earth's wars against Xenos and rebellious worlds in similar ways. Could Federation storytellers have toned down the brutal truth of humanity's near extinction and the extinction of other races? Even the birth of Slaanesh could have had a historical echo in the Federation's records. The Hobos supernova devastated the Romulan Star Empire, leaving it fractured and chaotic. The Federation recorded it as a tragic accident, maybe a failed technological experiment, but what if it was darker? Did the Romulans, or perhaps the Eldar, as they would be known, succumb to such excess that they birthed a chaotic god ripping apart their entire empire? While I admit there is some speculation here, it would explain how one of the galaxy's greatest empires was torn to shreds. And the Orcs look no further than the Klingons, warriors who would fight anyone, anytime. Perhaps the decline of Klingon society that we see in TNG and DS9 was just a step towards the Orcs' chaotic nature. Maybe one day this would even be proven true when their cousins would finally come out of hiding and tell us what they saw. These Orcs not being seen because, well, they're wearing purple. You might be thinking this is cherry picking, but ask yourself, what's more plausible? A utopian future where humanity unites all alien species in the pursuit of peace, yet can miraculously defeat any threat that comes along, or a lost human colony in cryosleep, fed a false history by an STC AI, preparing them for a doomed future where survival is almost impossible? These are just my thoughts, though. What do you think? Let's hear it in the comments below.